It's recap time. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode blank of the Shower Podcast, the podcast where I'm in my shower and you do you. I'm your host, Chip, and these, together with the following episodes, I still haven't decided on the exact number, will be a bit of an experiment. So let me explain a bit what I want to do here. I've been playing around with this tool that I found online called Notebook LM by Google that lets you feed it with videos, texts, information from the internet, and it kind of gives you the chance to chat and extract information from these videos. Out of curiosity, since now we produced more than 80 videos, I was like, okay, let me try to feed my videos to this tool and see what comes out of it. Specifically, there is a very, very, very intriguing option of creating a sort of podcast out of the information that you send that analyzes, describes, and summarizes the info that it's present in those videos. And now, something that, it's normal because, everybody has their days and you might have to do your stuff. You might have lost or just were not necessarily interested in a specific episode. And what I want to do here, since that unfortunately I will also be out for a few days and I feel like I need a bit of a moment of inspiration, because again, if you have followed the last episodes, you'll understand why, but I need a bit of a fresh start. So I was like, why not use this opportunity to create this tool, give you the chance for a recap, and continue with my progress towards the 365 episodes. I think it's a fair, let's say, trade-off between me bringing actual content that inspires me and you being able to actually think back on the episodes that we did and make sure to maybe go and listen again to the original one, trying to get the insight you were looking for. I won't go any further with this intro. I just wanted to throw it out there. Hope you like it. We'll start from the start up to episode 82. So maybe up to episode 80. I will keep I'll see how to divide it. But here we are. Enjoy it. Hope you will like it. And see you at the next one.
All right. So Chip from the Shower Podcast is back. He's asked us again to go through some of his recent episodes.
Yeah. So we're looking at episodes 6 through 10 this time.
Okay. Yeah. So we're going to look at sort of the main points that he's made and, maybe see how they all tie together, kind of give you a shortcut if you haven't listened to all of his stuff.
Yeah, it's a really interesting perspective, I think, to be able to look at several different episodes and sort of pull out the themes, the things that he's coming back to again and again.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't we just dive in? So episode 6 was called Einstein's House Chores. And the big idea here is how we think about how long tasks will take.
Yeah, and how inaccurate we are sometimes, especially with chores.
Yeah, especially with chores. It's like, you think about how long it's going to take to do the dishes or clean the bathroom.
And you just dread it. You put it off and put it off.
Yeah, you put it off and put it off because it just feels like it's going to take forever.
But then when you actually do it, it's like...
20 minutes?
Yeah, sometimes it really is.
Yeah, and that's something that Chair talks about. He says even though he doesn't mind housework, his mind will exaggerate how long it's going to take.
It's like our brains are trying to protect us from the unpleasantness.
Yeah, I guess so.
By making it seem so daunting that we just avoid it altogether.
Yeah. So he gives a bunch of examples. He says housework usually only takes him a couple of hours tops. But before he starts, it feels like this huge amount of time.
Yeah, that feeling of overwhelm can be really paralyzing.
Totally, yeah. And then he talks about making his podcast, which is interesting. He says it usually only takes him 30 minutes from recording to editing, but it still feels like this big thing in his mind.
It's like that mental buildup is almost disproportionate to the actual task.
Yeah, it is, yeah. You think it's going to be so much harder than it actually is.
It's really highlighting how our emotions are tied into our perception of time.
Yeah, for sure. And then my favorite example is he talks about mopping the floor. He says it only takes him like 20 minutes, but in his mind, it feels like it's going to take 7 years.
7 years. We all have those tasks that feel like they're going to take an eternity.
I know. And then it's like, okay, it's done.
It's funny how our brains do that.
It is, yeah. So he relates this to the idea of flow. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah, flow state.
Yeah. So like when you're doing something you really enjoy, like, I don't know, maybe you're playing a video game or you're really focused on some work that you love.
And you completely lose track of time.
You lose track of time. Yeah,
Hours can go by and it feels like minutes.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he's saying it's the opposite when you're doing something you don't want to do.
Absolutely. Time seems to drag on forever. It's like your brain is trying to make you stop.
Yeah. And his solution to this is actually kind of interesting. He started recording himself doing these tasks.
To prove to himself that they don't actually take that long.
Yeah. To see how long they actually take.
That's a really smart approach. It's like holding up a mirror to your own perception.
Yeah, totally. So let's move on to episode 7, which is called Motivation. And this is something I think we can all relate to. You know that feeling of wanting to do something, but not really having the motivation to actually do it.
Oh, yeah. I think everyone struggles with that at some point.
Yeah, and Chip's point is that you can't rely on motivation. Like, it's not always going to be there when you need it.
It's fleeting. It comes and goes.
Yeah, it comes and goes. And he says that it's usually inspired by seeing something you want. Like maybe you see someone who's really fit and you're like, oh, I want to be fit too.
It's like seeing a visual representation of your goal can trigger that initial spark.
Yeah. But then he talks about what he calls hard things. And these are like things you want to do, but they're outside of your normal routine.
Things that require a conscious effort to maintain.
Yeah. And you can always just quit. You know, like you're not obligated to do them.
Exactly. It's the difference between something you have to do and something you want to do.
Yeah. And he says that relying on motivation to do those hard things is just not going to work.
Because the motivation will inevitably fade.
It will, yeah. So his solution is to focus on small, manageable tasks. Like even when you don't feel motivated, just do a little bit.
It's about building momentum, even if it's just tiny steps forward.
Yeah. And he says that this helps you avoid the tipping point. You know, that point where you're just like, I give up.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Yeah, me too. But he also warns against burnout, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it's a good point. You can't just go full speed all the time.
Yeah, you can't be on all the time. You need to rest too.
You need to find a sustainable pace for yourself.
Yeah. So his strategy for that is to set realistic minimum goals. Like what are the essential things you need to do each day?
A baseline of accomplishment.
Yes, and if you feel motivated, you can do more.
Yeah.
But if not, that's okay too.
It's about being kind to yourself and recognizing your limits.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he talks about his podcast as being a way for him to stay active. Like he's creating this artificial motivation for himself.
Yeah, I think that's a really clever strategy. Having an external commitment can really help you stay on track.
Yeah, it's like, you're accountable to your listeners.
Right. You have a reason to show up consistently.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so episode 8 is all about memories.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
It is, yeah. So he starts by talking about how external stimuli can trigger memories.
Like a certain song or a particular smell can suddenly transport you back to a specific moment in time.
Yeah. Have you ever had that?
Oh, all the time. Music is a big one for me.
Me too, yeah.
Yeah.
Like a song will come on the radio and I'll be like, oh, wow. I remember exactly where I was when I first heard this.
It's amazing how powerful those associations can be.
It is, yeah. But then he gets into this idea that memory is really subjective. Like how you remember something might be totally different from how it actually happened.
It's not like a video recording, it's more like a reconstruction.
Yeah. And he actually shares a story about watching old home videos of himself. And he was like, wait a minute, I don't remember it happening that way at all.
It's a good reminder that our memories are not always reliable.
They're not, yeah. It's kind of freaky, actually, when you think about it.
It is. But it also makes you realize that everyone has their own unique perspective on events.
That's true, yeah. But then he says something really interesting, which is that over time, we tend to remember the good parts of things.
It's like our brains are trying to protect us from the negative.
Yeah. Or maybe they're just trying to make us happy.
That's possible too.
Yeah. He says that even periods that were really difficult at the time can seem more positive when you look back on them.
There's that saying, time heals all wounds.
Yeah, I guess so. And he talks about the importance of letting memories just be.
Not trying to force them or analyze them too much.
Yeah, just letting them evolve naturally.
Because over time, they might reveal new meanings to you.
Yeah, and he compares this to learning, like how you can study something and memorize all the facts, but you don't really understand it until you make your own connections.
It's about finding the personal relevance.
Yeah, and he says the same with memories, like you have to let them become part of your own story.
And that takes time and reflection.
Yeah, it does. Okay, so episode 9 is called Simulations, and this one gets a little sci-fi.
All right, let's hear it.
So he starts by talking about NVIDIA. You know the tech company.
Yeah.
They're doing all this really cool stuff with AI. Like they're creating these virtual environments for robots to train in.
So the robots can learn in a safe space before they're released into the real world.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, imagine if we could do that for dating.
What?
Yeah, like what if you could create a digital avatar of yourself and then have it interact with other avatars?
To see if you're compatible.
Yeah, and then you'd know if you were a good match before you even went on a date.
That's a fascinating concept.
It is, but then he starts asking all these questions like, is that even something we want?
Right. Is it better to find a partner through an algorithm or through the messy, unpredictable process of real-life interaction?
Yeah, and how accurate could these simulations even be? Like, can you really capture all the nuances of a person in a digital avatar?
There's so much more to us than just data points.
Right, and what about the impact on personal growth? Like, if you knew you were perfectly matched with someone, would you even bother to work on the relationship?
It's those challenges and differences that often help us grow and evolve as individuals.
Yeah, and he even brings up this idea of second best. Like, if your AI match didn't work out, would you always be wondering what could have been?
That's a really interesting point. It's like the fear of missing out on something potentially better.
Totally. And then he talks about the impact on self-esteem. Like, if you had all this data about yourself and others, would you start comparing yourself to everyone else?
It's a slippery slope. It could lead to a lot of self-doubt and insecurity.
Yeah. And his final point is that this technology might not be that far off.
Especially with all the data that companies like Facebook and Google are already collecting.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, actually, when you think about it.
It is. It makes you wonder what the future holds.
Okay, so last but not least, episode 10 is called The Power of Habit. And this is his 10th episode, which is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, that's a milestone.
It is. So he talks about how long it takes to form a habit, which is usually about 2-3 months of consistent effort.
That's the general consensus, but of course it can vary from person to person.
Yeah, for sure. And he says that one of the hardest things is building habits in a new environment.
Because you don't have those established routines and cues to trigger the behavior.
Right. And he talks about how our minds are always looking for shortcuts.
Yeah.
You know, like we want to do things the easy way.
We're wired for efficiency.
Yeah, which is why it's so hard to stick to new habits. Like our brains are always trying to talk us out of it.
It's the battle against procrastination.
It is, yeah. And he gives this funny example about forgetting to charge his camera battery.
And then it died on him in the middle of recording.
Yeah, and he was like, okay, I guess I need to make a habit of charging this thing.
Sometimes it takes a negative consequence to really drive the point home.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
So he makes this distinction between necessary habits and desired habits.
Like brushing your teeth is a necessary habit, going to the gym is a desired habit.
Yeah. And he says that the desired habits are harder to stick to because there's no immediate consequence if you don't do them.
Right. You don't get sick or get fired if you skip the gym.
Yeah. So his solution is to schedule specific time slots for those habits.
So it's not just a vague intention, it's an actual appointment in your calendar.
Yeah, and he talks about trusting your past intentions. Like, the you who made the plan probably had a good reason for doing it.
So don't let your present self sabotage your future self.
Yeah, exactly. And his main point is that consistency is key. Like,
Yeah.
even if you don't do it perfectly, just keep showing up.
Because repetition is what builds those neural pathways.
Yeah, and over time, you'll get better at it. So that's a lot of information.
It is, but it's all really interesting stuff.
It is. So what do you think? Like, what are some of the main takeaways from all of this?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that our minds are not always reliable. Like our perception of time, our memories, our motivations, they can all be distorted.
Yeah, and I think another takeaway is that we have more control than we think.
Yeah.
Like, we can choose to focus on small tasks. We can schedule time for our habits. We can even create artificial motivation for ourselves.
It's about taking ownership of our own behavior.
Yeah, and not letting our minds run the show.
Exactly.
So I think that's a good place to end it.
Yeah, I think so.
So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.